All right, everyone, just in time for the sirens to come by the office. Hello, my name is Patrick Corbett, and welcome to the 13th Annual Design for Drupal. This is our May webinar. I'm the CEO at Redfin Solutions and a volunteer here at Design for Drupal, along with Leslie Glynn, who will cover announcements in just a moment. For those of you who are new to Design for Drupal, this is an event devoted to Drupal design, UX, and front-end development, as well as the business and process challenges facing Drupal teams. We are typically an in-person event held every summer in Boston, Massachusetts, and we intend, hopefully next year, to make that happen. But in its place, we're holding monthly webinars on various Drupal design and front-end topics. We're supported by a great team of volunteers, including Catherine Carruthers, handling our video recordings, and Catherine Waldron, who manages our social media and mailings. I will now turn things over to Leslie Glynn for some announcements.
Great, thanks, Patrick, and welcome everybody to the May edition of the Design for Drupal webinar. There we go. Today's webinar is Crayons Down, Accessibility for UX is More Than Contrast. We're delighted to have Donna with us. Patrick will do an introduction in a minute. Let me just cover a few housekeeping things first. We are excited to let you know that we have signed on a keynote for our event. The event is going to be virtual again this year. It was a tough call, but based on the state of COVID right now, in addition to what it takes to get to secure a venue and try to get enough sponsors to cover the venue with an unknown number of participants, we decided one more year to do a virtual event. So it won't be a full day of sessions. It'll be on June 24th, which is a Friday. We'll have a keynote by Sharon Steed. Very excited to have Sharon join us. The topic will be developing sustainable empathy systems. So we'll have the keynote at noontime, and then we'll have an afternoon contribution event. So mark your calendars for June 24th. Contributions, I mentioned, we will be doing these during the keynote, during the day on June 24th, but there are many ways to contribute now. Here's some of the ideas. I've always, for all these webinars, talked about Claro and Olivero. Those actually were just based on the contribution to everybody in the community and the initiative leads. Those two, Claro is an administrative theme, and Olivero is going to be the default user theme. So those are both actually just put into the core during DrupalCon in Portland a couple weeks ago. So that's very exciting. But there's other things you can join here, including Easy Out of the Box and Project Browser. Everybody can join. Doesn't matter what your focus is, what you'd like to help out with. There's something for everybody. And this Ment is available. We'll talk more about what we're going to do on the 24th in terms of contributions going forward. The upcoming webinar series, we don't have any schedule right now. We're going to concentrate on our regular event on the 24th. We're going to resume the webinars in August of 2022. If you have any ideas for speakers, please send them to boston@designfordrupal.org. And once they're up there, you can sign up for them on our website. Community events, as I said, DrupalCon North America was held a couple of weeks ago. The recordings are all up. You can go to the Drupal Association YouTube channel, catch the keynotes and all the recordings. There's a lot of great recordings there, and it's free, so check those out. The next major event is DrupalCon Prague, which is in September. That is an in-person event, and that's held obviously in Prague. Some other community events coming up. It's a couple of in-person ones. May 27th is Drupal Camp New Jersey. June 1st is Drupal Jam Reunited. That is a hybrid event, so you could, if you're not in the Netherlands, you could take part in that event remotely. June 24th, look, I put the wrong date for our own event. It is June 24th. That's Design for Drupal Boston. That will be virtual again this year. And July 8th to 10th will be Drupal Camp Asheville in North Carolina, and that is an in-person event. You can catch all the events. There are many, global events and local events on the drupal.org/community/events page. So make sure you check that out. It has all your local meetups. A lot of those are starting up in person again. A lot of them are still virtual that you can take advantage of. So check that page out. Code of conduct is listed in the footer of the website, Design4Drupal.org. Making people feel welcome and inclusive is very important to us, as it is to everybody in the Drupal community. Treat everybody with dignity and respect. And if you have any issues, which we don't anticipate any, but if you do, reach out to myself or Patrick. The code of conduct goes for these virtual events as well as the in-person events. We do still need some help. We have a few people that met with me at DrupalCon that are willing to start helping out with the Design for Drupal event. So if you're interested, reach out again to Boston at Design4Drupal.org. We need some help with the website, some help coordinating all these webinars and the different things we do. We can always use help with social media, etc. We also need speakers, and we really need sponsors. So because our event is being held in June, the sponsors that are on the website and on the emails now, we're going to be reaching out to have each one of you renew for 2022 if you'd like to. And we're also looking for new sponsors for the 2022 season, which runs from June until next May. Thank you to our this year's Gold Digital sponsor, Redfin Solutions. And thank you to all the other digital sponsors. And I'll just read them real quick. Atten, Dev Collaborative, Talking Drupal, Acquia, Esteemed, Kalamuna, Evolving Web, Canopy Studios, Pantheon, 108 Degrees, McPhee Design. So thank you for everybody that sponsored us in 2021, and we look forward to everybody sponsoring us in 2022. It makes all these webinars and keynotes, etc., possible. Spread the word about today's event on social media. Use the hashtag D4D Boston. And the Q&As, use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask your questions, and we'll be going over those at the end of the presentation. And that's it. I'm going to turn it back over to Patrick. Thanks for attending again. I'll turn it back over to Patrick to introduce Donna.
Thanks, Leslie. Today's speaker is Donna Bungard, who is a longtime contributor to Design for Drupal and the entire Drupal community. Donna is currently the Senior Accessibility Program Manager for the Marketing Department at Indeed, and she has her CPWA certification from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Donna is also on the Drupal Community Working Group's conflict resolution team. Today, Donna will be speaking with us about accessibility, but specifically the strategies beyond color contrast that UX teams can employ without getting overwhelmed. Welcome, Donna. Welcome back to Design for Drupal, and take it away.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, everyone involved with D4D. I was telling a coworker of mine about this webinar and how excited I was, because this is a group that kind of adopted me many years ago and really helped me become so involved in the Drupal community. And I'm genuinely appreciative. For anyone who didn't notice it in the chat, transcripts are available. So that live transcript button at the bottom, or I don't know if my video is reversed, but it's somewhere down there. Go ahead and hit that. And let's just share the screen and get going. Crayons down. It's more than color. I'm going to skip my intro slide because, well, Patrick did such a great job. But we're going to talk about a little bit about the overview of why am I talking about this, some accessibility strategy, some practice, and how to kind of proof your own work with some empathy. The idea behind all of this is to always make accessibility more accessible to those who are doing it. I was going to wear it today. I haven't gotten to the mail yet. I just bought the beautiful shirt. It says progress over perfection. And that is the mindset we want to take on. So before we get into that, though, before we put our crayons down, I want to acknowledge that visual barriers, including those that involve color contrast, are profound. This talk has nothing about taking away from that. It's not lessening the importance. Those are profound barriers. Color contrast does impact individuals. A lot of individuals focus on the color blindness aspect, but it helps for those who are dyslexic. It's helpful for individuals with blurred vision, or frankly, for those of us who may be like sitting near windows and occasionally get a glare. This talk has nothing against that. It's that over the years, the accessibility focus has been a lot on that visual experience, which has left a lot of designers and UXers really focused in on that color contrast. But the fact is, we have a lot of other disabilities and a lot of other considerations we can do. 11% of individuals are ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We have a large percentage of the population who identify as being on the spectrum. 1 in 5 people are dyslexic. We have 15% with hearing difficulties. And, that doesn't necessarily all translate into deafness. There's bilateral, there's unilateral, there's tone deafness, there's all sorts of things. So the picture I'm trying to paint is there's a huge number of individuals and barriers out there. And my slide isn't changing. There we go. My goodness. Well, this is fun. I don't know what you're seeing. Give me a moment. I'm apparently having a few technical difficulties.
Looks like one slide is kind of merging into the other slowly. Oh, there we go.
Well, we're just going to skip that slide then.
Okay.
It basically said that neurodiversity represents the largest group of disabilities and the largest population. And basically, if you're not familiar with neurodiversity or what neurodivergence is, it's basically about how we process information. So this includes that ADHD, autistic spectrum disorder. It involves dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, synesthesia, which is when you taste colors and things like that, or hear or associate music with that. And this is a beautiful, different way of processing the information around us. It also makes up the largest number of individuals. So statistically speaking, we want to acknowledge these other disabilities. There are emotional disabilities. And whenever I talk about this is that I want to say we don't need to feel wind to know there's air. You don't need to experience anxiety or other emotional disabilities to the level that they are disabilities to be able to acknowledge that these are very real barriers for individuals. There are ambulatory mobility challenges for lots of individuals. One of the more common ones are hand tremors, and that's because it can be caused by so many things, from Parkinson's to ALS to arthritis to muscular dystrophy to multiple sclerosis. It can be medication induced, age. Most of us are probably going to experience this at some point. Recently, I was fortunate enough to hear the speaker Keely Catwell say, disability is part of the human experience. It's part of what we are. And that phrase has stuck with me. But to continue on, we have the audio barriers. We do have visual barriers that don't have anything to do with color. Diabetic retinopathy. Wow, I'm doing wonderful. There are damage to one's eyes from diabetes. There's tunnel vision, loss of central vision. There's blurred vision, glaucoma, cataracts. There's a lot of different disabilities out there that aren't impacted by contrast or not directly. So let's talk about it, creating an accessible strategy. Okay. The first is that sometimes in organizations, it gets to feel like, wow, we suddenly have to do accessibility. Like we've been talking about it for years, but it still feels very new to a lot of individuals. And who can blame them? We've been doing things ways for decades and they worked, right? We thought they worked. So now we're being asked to change, and that can be difficult and that can be challenging. But what we have to keep in mind is that it's not as though people are suddenly disabled. Our users have always been disabled. It's whether or not we've been showing them the respect to include them. Because it comes down to inclusivity. It comes down to all of that. And bringing it back to respect. I can't do a talk about accessibility on the web without talking about overlays. an effective strategy is to have someone become the hero of their own story. They're able on your website to go buy a pair of socks. Say that's it. It's not an exciting journey, but it's a viable journey. Individuals have methods they use to complete that transaction. Now, disabled or not, people have a process they're used to. If someone is disabled, they have the assistive technologies they need to get from A to B if the site is built in such a way or designed in such a way that facilitates this. Overlays try to step in and do that. It would be like, I want to help you. So I'm not going to make sure you can get food. I'm going to try to shove food in your mouth. That's what overlays do. It's just don't go there. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on universal design ideas. We're going to talk about how to make things accessible to all users. And most importantly, to build it into the processes we're already doing. And that was going to help us because, well, we don't want this to be stressful for your teams. We don't want to add a bunch of overhead. So if 25% of people in Canada, 26% in the US, there's global statistics, I won't bother us with those. But the point is, there's a large percentage of individuals in your target market who are already identifying as disabled. Make sure that's included in your personas and not to have a disabled persona, but to have those disabilities represented throughout. And then plan intentional user journeys. This is really just before you even start wireframing, think through exactly what those user journeys should be, and then make sure they're represented very clearly throughout. To give this context, if you process information differently, you have a cognitive or disability, you're neurodiverse, having that clear pathway is going to help reduce kind of some of that translation that has to go in your mind. If you have a mobility challenge or a disability involving mobility, it might take a lot more effort or more relative, I know, but it might take extra effort to try to find that next step in that user journey that makes it not worth it. If you do have a visual disability or impairment that you're using assistive technology, knowing where you're going helps you get there faster. So keep those intentional, consistent user journeys throughout. And please be inclusive in your media and overall representation. And this includes your alt tag descriptions. If being disabled is part of that human experience, it's already part of us. We want to see somebody who looks like us. We want to see or experience media that relates to us. So plan for that at the beginning. Plan to have genuinely inclusive materials, and don't be afraid to say that in your alt text. Don't allow the person who's taking in a non-visual experience to hear your media be inclusive also. So let's put this all into practice, right? One moment. I didn't have time. Anyone who hears me speak knows I'm usually drinking coffee. I didn't have caffeination break, so we're just going to have to go with water. I'm sorry. But nonetheless, let's look at it. Like the water, accessibility is not punishment. A lot of the times when people are given constraints of saying, you have to be creative, you have to do all this great stuff. Oh, by the way, you can't do that. It feels like a punishment. And what it is it's actually more of an opportunity to be all that much more creative and create even more meaning, more value in the experiences you're building. You're designing someone's journey through a digital experience. So you have the power to really get in there, and it's just a refinement of what you're already doing, and it's beautiful. So that first thing is, I kind of touched on it earlier, Be consistent. Create familiar experiences. Clear navigation flow. Consistent calls to action. Don't make it a larger cognitive load than needed. Don't go ahead and build something so creative that it's hard. There's challenges beyond accessibility. There's a lot of individuals who, I think it's called officially low reading. There's people who English are a second language, or if you're working in a language other than English. For example, I'm awful at Spanish. I've tried so many times so I can muddle through a few things, but anything complex, I'm certainly never going to make my way through. If it's someone's second language, that's more. There's that motor skills. There's also their emotional tax that you're asking someone to do when we're not consistent. And for some individuals, that level of frustration can create or can put up a barrier. So that consistency is the key. And then there's white space. We all know we want white space as, designers, developers, designers, UXers, you already know this part, but what is really, really important about it is that white space has been known to help individuals who are dyslexic differentiate characters more easily. ADHD, those who identify as on the spectrum, they may, this helps them focus and just focus in on what you need them to do. We're asking people to go to our websites, right? We want them on our sites. We want them to take in our information, and white space makes that easier. It also helps if somebody has mobility challenges, if somebody can kind of target where they're going with their mouse or with their keyboard. So just make sure that spacing is available. A lot of times we like text over images. It's cool. You have that big header behind that cityscape or something. I understand that. Visually, it can be a bit confusing. So thinking of, that larger, really bold text, sometimes larger isn't enough. Sometimes even bold isn't enough, because what we're looking at is the weight of that text, the vertical line width, that thickness, and how that's going to contrast to every part of that image. So what we're thinking about is, screens or opacity 60%, navy blue with white text or something. It's something to reduce the distraction. It's not only to, get the brand colors in there or what have you. It's reducing that distraction. And that's what we need to do, is to visually make it less taxing. Line height should always be 1.5 times. That is another one that is really important for individuals who are trying to focus on a given line. And another thing to keep in mind with line height and white space, and what's coming up next is our line length, is you see me doing that. If you're a visual, I am right now doing the pinch motion with my hands. That pinch motion is me trying to talk with my hands of that zooming. What it is that a lot of individuals will look at their screen at 200%, and they'll go through it. Maybe they're going at 200% while listening to a screen reader. These are very, very normal user experiences, even if they're not what you may or may not be accustomed to. So keeping that line height and that line length is allowing individuals to zoom and stay focused. Our font choices. This is going to come back to respecting our audience and not trying to save anybody. Are individuals who are sensitive to fonts. Now, this again could be dyslexia. This could be emotional disabilities. This may be any number of, there's many things that can make someone's font preferences pretty strong. Blurred vision. Keeping it simple is key. Yes, you want to use a sans serif font. Yes, you want to go big. yes, we have to avoid those abnormal letter spacings, which can make it so hard to read. You want to make sure you don't ever fully justify your text. But it's also important to remember that going out and finding this special, unusual, but it's supposed to be dyslexia friendly font or what have you might actually do more harm than good in the long run. Because what if this person, because everyone else in the world uses Arial, Helvetica, or a similar sans serif font, finds this other font more challenging, not because of how it's laid out, but because of how it is different. We're going back to consistency being a key. Having that difference might create a barrier as well. Focus indicators. They're important. If you're tabbing through your site, if you're hovering over, you really want it to be obvious. A lot of times, way back in the before times, like, a million years ago when I still did some design, I'd always like that. I'm going to do dark blue to the slightly lighter blue, which I thought was great. But I know but it's not very clear. And not only for individuals in terms of color contrast, but in terms of individuals tapping through that keyboard. Oh, that's ugly. Why did I need that? No, that outline means something. Those focus indicators mean something. And if maybe you're doing a blue background for that, yes, this is a color contrast thing, but make sure that blue doesn't mess with the default blue. And if it does, change the focus indicator color there. Design your skip controls. Those are those skip to main content that happens when you tab when you go to a website. A lot of the times they're forgotten. A lot of users who are using keyboard only or screen readers or any of these assistive technologies do still perceive visually. So planning and designing those skip controls makes it easier for them to be able to see where they are and where they're going. Also, it goes down to that respect part. Don't make it an afterthought. Be intentional. The buttons and the links, again, I make another call out. There is, again, I'm never saying color contrast isn't important. There is that rollover state, but plan for them to be programmatically buttons, meaning if you're doing something that looks like a button, but it's not, maybe design it differently right from the start. Target size is important right up there with spacing. For example, I mentioned how hand tremors are a very normal disability. Again, I'm trying to use the word normal a lot because disability is normal. All that we're doing here, all of the individuals, all the personas, all of these challenges are very normal. So say, for example, someone does have that hand tremor, here, I'll hold up my phone. Wonder how long I apparently have had my flashlight on for quite some time. There we go. So imagine that you're surfing the web on your phone. If you have a harder time clicking a button, a smaller button is going to be much harder. So make sure your sizes are large. And that's also where that line height comes in for target size. It's not the official WCAG piece of it, but that line height being 1.5 allows someone to go through and be less likely to hit a link that they didn't intend to. Videos. Please plan for your transcripts. It can be an accordion that expands. It can be a linked pop open, but right in your wireframes, include the space for those transcripts. And then if you are doing any kind of custom controls, even if it's a pause button on a background video, because if you have a background video going on, you do need to make it pause too. Plan for what those look like. Plan for where they belong. The idea is to be intentional about where all of this belongs. And same with images, of plan for where the captions go. If you know that they're going to have 5 tables, or that maybe you're working on a site that's going to produce a lot of research papers. So charts, graphs, those kind of complex images, make sure right in the design, you're leaving ample space for those captions that are required. If you're looking at images that may have a lot of like, this is who this person is left to right or something like that, plan for them. If we start building these into our wireframes, it's going to be much more natural to get them once you get to your pattern library or your module development or however your process works. And then plan for your alt text. And this is where that inclusivity comes in. If you have a person, I have here as an example, someone looking nervous versus a person looking uncomfortable as the only Black non-cisgender applicant at a job fair. There's a very big difference in the story you're telling. One is someone, they look nervous. Honestly, I had to run to the store and buy milk this morning. I was looking at my time because I needed to get to work. I was looking at the line ahead of me. I briefly looked nervous. That's a very different story, someone looking nervous, than an underrepresented group at a job fair feeling very uncomfortable because it was not an inclusive space. Plan the alt text to tell the story. This is content strategy. And maybe you're not the one who has to write the alt text, but chances are you're helping choose the imagery. So help bring those pieces together. Start the conversation, advocate for inclusivity. Because when you're generic, what someone interprets is going to be more about their personal story and not about your content. Think about that for a minute. How we interpret that. If someone were to say, fair-skinned, dark-haired woman in chair talking to herself, what does that say? Okay, so I'm really talking to 50 of you. But that alt text doesn't say that. So think of the picture it comes in your mind. There's a lot of opportunity here to be inclusive and bake that into all of our cultures, work cultures. You may have forms that live elsewhere. You may be working with Marketo, Pardot, Salesforce, yada, yada, yada. There's a million places. Or maybe it is something within the ecosystem of your digital pieces. You do have the power as UXers to design something to have really mindful labels, lots of good spacing, submit buttons that are clear. Go ahead. And again, it comes down to being a little mindful there. Be mindful and think through that form, because even if you are working with an automated system, you still have some wiggle room there. Movement. Vestibular issues are, balance and dizziness and all of that. A lot of us will experience it at least some of the time. There's common comorbidity between hearing loss and vestibular dysfunctions. Also, individuals who have a hard time focusing for any number of reasons, that's going to maybe create anxiety or just distraction. So parallax, even strong contrast of black and white can produce the equivalent of motion. It needs to be used minimally and with intent. Again, I need to stop using that word. Basically, what I'm trying to communicate is that movement can be fantastic, but sometimes we're tempted to put it in just because, wow, that moving thing looks neat. And you know what? As Donna, just person who wants to be, it's really sunny out, sitting outside with this iced tea right now. Donna thinks that motion looks kind of neat. But as a professional in this field and in accessibility, I recognize that not everyone is going to perceive that the way I do. And it doesn't matter how neat Donna thinks it is. What matters is how is that going to communicate to all of the audiences? And am I putting up a barrier using something that just is cool for cool's sake? And maybe it really isn't that cool if it's putting up a barrier. And maybe I need to rethink that perspective. So proofing with empathy. I'll never forget, after one of my talks, somebody said, "Oh, I know how to sum up all of your talks, Donna. Empathy, empathy, empathy." But truth be told, that is kind of the key to accessibility, is to be able to think in terms from perspectives that we're not going to be able to ever live. So we're going to start with what we do know, what we have lived. You don't need to necessarily go through and be like, oh, I need to learn about it. I need to learn about ADHD. I need to learn about dyslexia. I need to learn about hand tremors. I'm not giving you a checklist of disabilities to look up. Start with what you know, because that's the key behind these universal design principles, is that they're going to help everybody. So think about, have you ever sprained your dominant hand? I once knew a gentleman who, when a particular video game came out 20 years ago, he spent so much time that first weekend playing it. He was so excited, he sprained his thumb for 2 weeks. How would it work for you if your dominant hand were sprained? Many of us have worked. I was working from home a long time, but a lot of people were new to working from home the last few years. How many of us have had children run through, dogs barking, and usually all at the same time? How did that impact your ability to be on the Zoom call and participate, to take in the information on that webinar? Many of us have cracked our phone screens. That's going to impact your ability to navigate, scroll, click buttons effectively. Have you ever had a day when you're just done? You're burnt out, you're exhausted physically, mentally, and you just can't take anymore. And maybe that emotion isn't to the level of disability. Maybe it's just a really bad day. How did that change the way you perceived the data you were presented with? These are not going to be one-on-one experiences that I'm describing. There's going to be times, though, when you're distracted, when you're hurting or unable to focus, when maybe your mobility isn't great. You're going to be able to relate on some level, even if you don't ever have that disability. Here are ways for you to put yourself in that, okay, what would help me get through the day? What would help me get through this transaction? What would help me take in this information or sign up to get that degree or that certificate program? And then when you're ready to take that next step, definitely educate yourself. There's so many amazing groups out there. Obviously, I'm biased that Ally Talks, A11YTALKS.com, has a lot of amazing content. Again, obviously biased, but nonetheless, there's other groups out there. The International Association of Accessibility Professionals puts out webinars frequently. There's amazing speakers all over. I'm not going to think of them all now, but there's both textbooks, there's education, or if you just want to learn about disability, it's on Audible. There was this amazing series that the New York Times had done a while back, and it was called About Us. Quick history lesson: the American with Disabilities Act came about because of what they call the Capitol Crawl. The Capitol Crawl was a bunch of individuals who, some of whom were unable to, there was no ramps, so they actually physically crawled up to the Capitol building to demand rights. That's where the American Disabilities Act came from. Capitol Crawl was a historic event and a huge moment of power for the disabled community. But they've coined the phrase, nothing about us without us. About Us is a series of essays written by individuals who are disabled or disabled individuals. A lot of people are going now to identity first language because disability isn't a bad word. Being disabled isn't bad. It's just a fact of life. So what we're doing here is, I use that word intent, but make a conscious effort to think beyond your experiences. And as you're doing this, give yourself a whole lot of grace. It's progress over perfection. We're not going to think of everything. I mean, this slide is not a perfect example since I forgot to do the 1.5 spacing on this slide. Give yourself grace. You're not going to catch it all every time. But that's why we're working together and our teams, in our Drupal community, in our other professional communities. We have the ability to build this into our culture. So with that, questions? And another sip of water that I'm going to pretend is caffeinated.
Thanks, Donna. That was excellent. I think I might kick off just with one question of my own, which is, given your point about empathy, which is really, a strong point, and I think that's really important thing to people to understand, is that I don't think it's as simple as just checking a bunch of things off a list and saying your site's accessible, move on. It's a part of the process that people need to fold into their development. With that said, what do you think the biggest barrier to web accessibility is right now?
I would think, and this is Donna's thoughts are her own moment. But I think the biggest barrier is that, like, we're all following the W3C's WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And historically, those tend to be very screen reader focused. Again, visual barriers are profound. That's a good thing that they were screen reader focused, because that was a huge hurdle we needed to go over. The challenge, I think, with accessibility on the web right now is that we're learning more and more about all these other barriers. And groups who are very well intended are checking the box of WCAG saying, I'm accessible now, not having the perspective to understand that you can check every box and do it all right and still not be accessible. So that skew over is the biggest challenge we have. And that's why I always promote an empathy first approach, because I think, again, I believe, Donna believes here, I believe that if we can really practice this whole putting each other in someone else's shoes and seeing that other perspective, we're going to catch more problems and more potential issues that somebody might have than not. And that is going to involve a lot of listening and asking questions and probably a whole lot of mistakes, but
Yep.
We're going to get there.
Yeah, and we're a long way into accessibility. This is not a new topic, but being reminded of this and working to work it into your daily routine is, I think, something people still need to work on. We have some questions. Ruth has a question. She asked, can the focus state of the same style as the hover state, or can it be the same style as the hover state, or does it need to be different in any cases?
In terms of your mouse, I think it's fine to be the same, but in terms of your keyboard, I think individuals are expecting that box that is default. And again, you might need to change the color of it, but that box hovering over it, I think, is the expected bit. And just for the consistency's sake, I'd recommend working on if you have to change it, a twist on that default bit. So that way it's familiar.
Mhm.
And it's, again, that lowering the cognitive strain.
Katie asks, what do you mean by transcripts? You must have mentioned that earlier in your slides.
Yes. Very often you can have not only captioning on a video, but you can actually have a transcript, meaning, for example, what we have here on the Zoom is live transcripts. That means it's not showing up necessarily at the bottom of the screen. There's an option in Zoom to make it do that too. But it's also going to output a document of auto captioning, of auto transcription of everything I've said, everything Patrick said, any of all of us, Leslie, whomever. And it will put all of that in there. It'll be, this person says this person says this person says that. And if you go to, there's wonderful companies out there who do this, like 3Play Media is known to do that. And they'll do the wonderful thing of that's clap in brackets. And they'll bring that up more and more and more, like raising the quality of those transcripts. So what that is that instead of having it over it, you either pop it into a new window or you expand it, or you just include the text underneath of everything said and those sounds. Does that help?
Help me. Hopefully it helps Katie. An anonymous attendee has a comment. I'm 20 years into a front-end dev career with a lot of accessibility experience, and this session is stellar, Donna.
Oh, thank you.
I agree. Next question. Do you have a go-to resource for using the various ARIA label attributes?
In truth, I'm no longer a developer. I've stopped developing about 5-6 years ago. So my resource for ARIA is usually a friend, me asking questions. There's the Alley Style Guide that Carrie Fisher had made years ago. I don't know if that's updated still, but I'll admit, guess who's one of the people I call? There's, I call Marky, I'll call Jonathan. I call people. I'm sorry. I would definitely look that up. If you want to tag me in LinkedIn later, I can ask the people who know better where to go.
Great. Katie asks, can we put those resources for learning about disability in the chat? We could probably put that on the website too, but if you have a link, Donna, I can put it in the chat as well. Okay.
I can do, I know it's, here I can just do this, alleytalks.com. It's audio book about us. Articles. I can look up more later and I can give you more later. Oh, the IAP. Those were the 3 I mentioned.
Thank you.
But we can look at more.
Liza asks, how do we be inclusive with accessibility considerations when planning for multilingual sites, including with alt text?
Excellent thing.
Question.
Yeah, alt text is something that should be translated. So keep that in mind throughout that. Also keep in mind that if you are having a screen reader, and screen readers will read content with the pronunciation of the language declared. So if you are doing multilingual and say let's say all of your alt text is in Spanish, and then you put it into American English as the language, it's going to pronounce that Spanish probably very much like I pronounce Spanish. It's probably going to be, I'm trying to even think of a word that's going to sound awful, but there's going to be words that are sounding awful. What you'll need to do is look into translation opportunities there. You should also need to think about color. For example, a conversation I was recently privileged to be a part of was about the red star for required. Except in Japan, this was one of the websites was going to be in Japan. Red doesn't mean warning. Red's a celebratory color. So you might want to learn about cultural colors. If you're working with a brand, it may or may not have direct impact, but there might be a play in there. Essentially, the parts that are related to disability are universal because people are disabled everywhere. So you're going to want to approach cultural sensitivities more than have to adapt it for accessible reasons.
Joshua asks, and I think I might summarize this. You mentioned overlays early on. Can you mention bad examples or talk more about that? They were thinking that overlays are more like modals, but I think I was thinking you meant the overlay tools that are like the little accessibility person in the corner that you click and you have a bunch of control over the site to make it more accessible. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I apologize. I should have been more specific. Overlays in terms of modals are fine as long as you develop them so they don't have keyboard traps or any of those. What I meant by overlays is that there are organizations, companies, I'm not going to call any of them out because I haven't worked with any of them directly, but that they do is it's a bit of JavaScript that you're supposed to be able to put on any site, and it's magically going to make it accessible. So that JavaScript goes in and gives people the ability to change font size, change color schemes, reduce motion, things like that. The reduce motion might actually be a good idea for sites who don't offer that normally. Nonetheless, they're changing fonts, they're changing the look, sometimes they're changing the layout a little bit. They're changing the site's visual perception. The challenge is that, for example, there's something called the Mercury Reader. It reduces distractions if you're on a web page, and it's wonderful for if someone's ADD, ADHD, that's where they're marketing towards. But on this autistic, those are some of the key places they're marketing to. But what it does is it wipes everything out except the main body of content. It kills the nav, it kills the sidebars, it does this. If you're trying to use that as your default, because that's how you perceive the web, and then you have this other thing messing with it, it can actually cause, I don't know specifically with Mercury Reader, but with assistive technologies in general, they can kind of fight each other. It can take away from the experience for someone using assistive tech. I'm not speaking directly to Mercury Reader combining, but I'm just using that. That is an example of assistive technology that's not a screen reader. And so, who knows how it works with somebody who's using an iMouse or a puff mouse, a puff way to control the mouse. There's so many different ways that people use the web. Trying to say this one line of JavaScript is going to be a magic pill that makes it all better. It doesn't work as expected. And again, it's the difference between making it so somebody can reach the buffet and trying to spoon feed them.
Yeah, I think my experience with those tools has been that clients will ask for those, and we will build a site to be accessible. But I think it's almost like, what about those things that maybe we didn't think about or that come up? We want a little catch-all in the corner to do that. I feel like that's often kind of the strategy there. Hopefully it's not to just make the site accessible and make an inaccessible site accessible. But I think, is there ever a good time to use those tools? Like, is there ever, or is it really just, if you can avoid them, avoid them?
Everyone I've heard who's had experience with them, it's been negative. Again, Donna's beliefs are her own. I don't believe there's a reason to do them. If you have a site that you're building to be accessible and you have a good accessibility statement or way for people to contact you, Don't only have a phone number if someone's nonverbal. That doesn't do them any good. Don't only have a form if somebody is non-visual. Maybe that's more frustrating and they just want to call. Give somebody more than one way to contact you. But give people ways to contact you, to tell you, not to, if somebody is frustrated, they have a reason they're frustrated. It's not that they're being unreasonable. It's that there is a barrier and they're looking for you to make it so that they can give you their business.
That makes sense. How do you handle describing people in a photo when their gender or skin color is not clear?
I think it would be on a case-by-case basis, but you might just, that's sensitive because on one hand, I don't want to assign gender. I don't want to assign a racial identity. On the other hand, it's something that, one of the criticisms Netflix did when they first did their captioning was they'd only call out somebody who was Black or Indian. They'd only call out somebody who was transgendered or dressed in a way they felt was different than their cisgender, their gender at birth. Sexual gender at birth. Hello, I apologize everyone for saying all of that clumsily. We don't only want to not call out the white straight people is what I'm really trying to say here. So I guess what I would suggest was that I would just use maybe say non-binary if you're unclear, or it would really depend on the situation. I would love to have this conversation in greater depth because this is one I'd want to handle with great mindfulness and genuine sensitivity. Because I respect everybody and I just would want to look at a case-by-case basis of how can we make this the most inclusive experience possible. And I don't know that off the top of my head without seeing what we're talking about, but I appreciate this question because now I'm going to go back and I'm going to be thinking about this a lot. And I'm actually going to be pinging a couple of friends of mine a lot about this because it's like, wow, that is a really important question to ask.
Yep, and Johanna mentioned in the chat, you could say gender unclear, but it really matters if it's part of what you're trying to say. So if it's not part of what you're trying to say, don't try to identify because it's not important. And it is very it's very difficult. Yeah, there's never a clear answer sometimes, but I think the important thing is that the question's being asked. Agreed.
Absolutely agreed.
Another question, we got one more minute. No overlay, no modals, and that may have been misunderstood, but what about fixed footer GDPR cookies message? Are those accessible?
In my experience, they are. It's just a matter of, frankly, test it. Make sure that it's put in such a way that it is coming up and allowing people to close it. It's going to need to come up first. So that way the screen reader user who is visual can close it and still not have to navigate all the way backwards or anything. So there's a couple of different ways to do it, but I just recommend test it. If you're on a Mac, at least do VoiceOver. It's important to keep in mind, not every screen reader user out there is an expert level screen reader user. Some people, a lot of people, their sight fades as they age. I just had a glasses appointment. Guess who's getting her prescription kicked up a notch? It's a natural part of the aging process. And there's a lot of health concerns that happen 40s, 50s, 60s, or what have you, that can impact and speed that along as well. So not every screen reader user is an expert. Like not every lip reader is an expert. Keep in mind that any testing you do is going to be good. It's going to help catch things, even if you're not the expert yet. So go ahead, give it a try, use only your keyboard, knock your screen up to 200% zoom and only use your keyboard. And can you close it? Then you're probably safe.
We've got couple more. Will you please make your slideshow available? And we can do that if you're comfortable, Donna. We can put it on the website.
I can certainly do that. To be honest, it's probably going to take me a little bit to get this to the D4D team because I want to make it accessible, and Google Slides is not inherently so. It's going to take me a little work. So I'm going to already apologize for my tardiness, but it's going to take me a little bit to get there. But I will get this over to everyone.
Great. Last question, just a comment. You raised all the concerns I have in relation to identify people in alt text without wanting to make assumptions, and they agree that it's difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Donna.